Hey, welcome to the lesson on Sagittarius. So, the ruler of Sagittarius in the zodiac is Jupiter. And the birth of Jupiter, who the Greeks called Zeus, and so since it's a Greek story, we'll use the Zeus for the name, is very illustrative of kind of the theme for Sagittarius, which is I have vision, I kind of see the path. So, when the gods were born, the giants that gave birth to the gods, um, Kronos was this basically the father of the gods, father time, Saturn, and his wife was Rhea, and Rhea gave birth to the gods, and Kronos would eat them, and Rhea would give birth to another god or goddess, and Kronos would eat them. And because Kronos didn't want anyone to take over his reign. And eventually Rhea got sick of this. And so when she gave birth to her 12th child, Zeus, she gave Kronos a rock instead. So Kronos ate the rock, and then Zeus was able to overthrow Kronos and essentially cut open his stomach and get out all his brothers and sisters. And then the Olympians went to live on Mount Olympus, and everything was happy and wonderful. But it took vision for that to happen. It took foresight of what was happening, cause and effect, and preventing the process for Rhea to do that. And that is what we're learning through Sagittarius. So a lot of times, if you're in a Sagittarian learning phase, you will be basically some morals or ideals will be forced upon you. So you'll grow up in some restrictive religion. You will have to do something for work, something. You'll be basically told this is the way. And that is, in a way, it's to help you find that you're supposed to find your own path. You're supposed to create your own values and your own purpose, right? Because, I mean, it's not natural to, like, attack your father and cut him open, right? That's what Zeus had to do. And so that came from his own impetus, right? Rhea wasn't like, hey, like, how about you cut open my husband and let everybody out? Like, no, that was Zeus, right? Rhea was just kind of like, hey, like, stop eating my kids. And it also shows us how, like, our fears come to happen, right? If Kronos had just been like, hey, I've got kids, this is cool, we'll all chill out together and do our thing, like, maybe that's not a big problem. Maybe he's not overthrown. So as we think of Sagittarius, it is vision, to take aim, to connect, and to grow with who we are and learn. So a lot of the key traits of Sagittarius are adventure, communication, optimism, organization, curiousness, creativity, honesty, and righteousness. A strong sense of good and evil. And what typically, if we're really strong in those qualities, we could be an architect, which are really creative and make things. We could be a missionary. We could travel as well placed for adventure and finding things. College professor, right? So Sagittarius correlates with higher learning, as Gemini correlates with kind of basics learning, basics tasks, elementary abilities, how we do things. Sagittarius is really the thinking mechanism that helps us through that process, right? It takes vision to get to where we want to be. Like, what do we want to do in life? How are we driving towards our goals? When I was attempting to do sales on the road for 401k plans. I was basically a government education employee. I wasn't technically doing sales, but it was kind of sales without sales. And I found myself in the office of either a principal or a superintendent, and I said, like, how did you get here? And he said, if you're willing to travel, you can get any job you want. It was kind of clear that he wasn't doing amazing as a superintendent or principal or whatever he was in this position. But he had found the job he wanted because he was just willing to keep going from state to state or town to town to improve himself through the process. And he got whatever licenses and stuff he needed along the way. And I was kind of doing the same thing at the time. Was working in Connecticut. I wasn't super happy with my job. And I was like, where else can I do this? And my company was like, let's go to send you to Kentucky. And I was like, all right, anywhere but here in Kentucky. And they were like, how about here in Kentucky? And I was like, okay. And that's how I did. And, even my last job, moved out to Ohio. Moving definitely opens your opportunities for employment and to learn new things because your skill is always needed somewhere. And usually it's needed somewhere to a greater degree than it's needed where you are. Because if you learn something in place, there's probably other people that learned it in place in that spot. And so if it's a skill that's needed everywhere, you can probably go somewhere to do that skill. Talk about passion and purpose now, right? If you just have a skill and you go somewhere and do it like I did or this guy did, you're not going to get amazing results. Like you're going to get mediocre results and you'll learn through the process, but that's not it. It's really our passion that drives what we do and what we create. And so when we talk about passion, you've got to be like, all right, so kind of what's your purpose? Your purpose is to create and serve. And like everybody's purpose kind of boils down to creation and serving. And so there's some creation and serving as human beings. We exist for other human beings. Some human beings exist to meditate in the woods and never talk to anyone and be a hermit. But for the most part, we have families, we have friends, we have at least extended family, if not direct family. We have corporations we work for. We have people that we serve, things we create for people. Something's doing it. And so vision is kind of like, what are we creating? So are we creating art? Are we bringing our religion? Are we designing buildings as an architect? Are we architecting data? Are we translating things? What's that essence? And then we want to have some goal out of that. So the goal is kind of whatever you want. You want to make so much money a year. You want to get some sort of specific accolade, just something that's very out of reach, right? So we talk about 3 tiers of goals. So you have kind of like your base level goal of like, it's more or less a task. You know how to do it. You've done it before. Let's just kind of go do it again and get it over with. And then you have your secondary level goal where we don't know how to do it exactly, but we kind of have a list of everything we need to do. So I want to go buy a house, right? I've never bought a house before, but I kind of know that if I show up to the real estate agent and say like, hey, I want to buy a house, and I show up at the bank and I say like, hey, I need a mortgage, like that's going to all come together and I'm going to get a house of some size. Like a goal would be I want this specific $1 million home on the beach, um, and there's no way I can afford it, and I don't have the credit, right? So like that's a goal is it's something higher, right? It's that higher level goal that we're going for. We want to start to take aim at that goal. And so there was a book called Zen and the Art of Archery that was written by Eugene Herrigel. And it's an amazing book. And he talks about how he learned archery in Japan. And so he goes off that he's an American. He goes off to Japan and he wants to have a hobby. And so he's like, I'll do archery. And the Japanese guy doesn't want to train him because he's a Westerner and they don't appreciate hard work and et cetera, et cetera. He gets some recommendations, calls in some favors, does everything he can, gets in the class. And basically what the archery instructor teaches him right away is just pick up the bow and let the arrow fly. So they basically set up bales of hay where targets might be, not very far away. And he's just like, when you can pick up the bow and fire it, we'll talk more. And he goes through this long process of just picking up the bow, and he can't quite get it, right? He kind of gets it up, holds it, and lets it go. And the instructor's like, nope, not happening. And the idea is to get into a fluid motion where you come back and you release it exactly when you're ready to do the thing, right? So that's that aiming, that seeing, that vision of Sagittarius. That's kind of that learned mechanical process as you pull back and set up and release all in the same motion, in the same thought process, right? And so you're training that part of your mind to just kind of let go. And then once you get that down, then you can start aiming at the target and adding in different levels of difficulty. And so that's the same with our goal, right? So when you're going for a goal, you are doing everything and learning in the process, right? So we should always be studying for our goal when we study. We talk in self-development that you should be studying a certain amount every day, 15 minutes of reading. Maybe you should be journaling. Maybe you should be writing your goal or something like that. But it should always be directed at your goal. There's an ancient story that I think both in the Mahabharata and the Odyssey. And I'll tell the version of the Odyssey. So Odysseus comes home, and he is after the Trojan War, and there are a bunch of suitors that are lined up to marry his wife because his wife has died, and so he needs to prove who he is. And so what Odysseus needs to do is he needs to show his skill in archery because he has this awesome skill in archery. And what the test is to shoot through all of these axe handles. So there's like a bunch of axe handles, and there is either like an eyelet. I always imagined having an eyelet at the end, but now that I'm thinking about it, it might be closer to like the head of the club. But anyway, so he has to, since he's like the best archer ever, he has to shoot through these axes. And there's a similar difficult shot that somebody else has to do in the Mahabharata on the Indian side of things, and which is why we know the story is so old. It's a very ancient Indo-European story that kind of we think split off and went both ways. It is only through that calm of knowing the process, and Odysseus is famous for his wit, and this is kind of like his selling point that he's Odysseus. It is through that process of kind of thinking through this process, this engagement, that we really start to understand and create our own philosophies and our own morals and our own like what's important. After that, after Odysseus proves who he is, he basically goes crazy and kills all the suitors, right? And so and one of the very important things of Greek culture at the time was that you don't kill house guests. And here's all these house guests, and Odysseus just slaughters them all. He makes his own rules through the process. The stories of Homer and the Mahabharata are really like the end of myth for humanity. So if you think back to kind of the time period or when they actually get written down, the Odyssey around 800 BC and the Mahabharata, I think starts to get codified around 400 BC. I'm not sure the exact time, but the Trojan War is set in about 1200 BC. But the story about the axes, we think, is much, much older and just was kind of tagged on to the whole process. Right, so as this mythology kind of starts to settle and we start to get an idea that there's actually history instead of just stories about gods, and these essentially it seems like great people got elevated to these god hero type levels. Gods are people that we really don't remember that well, and heroes are people that were just legendary and we remember as gods. And so these things kind of start to connect together, and these stories just last through time, and they get told and retold. Each culture kind of starts to appropriate the stories so that it makes sense for the culture, right? And it's creating vision. It creates vision for the culture as a whole and that path forward. When we start to work that into our daily lives, and how do we work this sort of thing, right? So we've got a goal, we're doing a thing, what's the process, right? And so in Lean Six Sigma, we talk about a process called DMAIC, or define, measure, analyze, improve, control. The goal is to define, what are we doing? Do we understand what we're doing? I'm picking up, in terms of the arrow, the goal is to get the arrow into the hay bale. And so that's the goal. Measure. Did I put the arrow in the hay bale? Yes, no, checkbox, right? Analyze. How well did I execute the shot, right? Did I pick up, pull, or did I pick up, hesitate, think about it a little, wave all the way around, and go all over the place, right? And then improve. You practice, and you practice, and you practice, and then you put up a target, and can you hit the target? And can you hit the target closer to the center? Can you hit the target in the center? Control. Are you doing the same thing over and over and over and over again? And so, basically the goal is to pull up, take the shot, and see where you hit the target wasn't there in the first place. And once you can start hitting the same spot over and over and over again, and you get consistency, then you put the target back and you're like, all right, can I move that consistent spot closer to the center? You're controlling the shot. I remember I went on a date once, and it was somebody that did sports, and we went bowling, and she would do the same stupid motion that was seemed not to be working at all the whole time we were bowling, but she had dramatically improved by the time we were done. She would do the thing, and it would go the ball would go all over the place, but she was able to zone in zone in the ball and kind of really like just by doing this motion over and over and over and over again and figuring out like, all right, when I do this, where does the ball go? It was a really fascinating date. Never talked to her again. I was way too all over the place at the time. Yeah, and so that's kind of like what we were doing. And so as you define, measure, improve, control, you want to find out like what's improving things, right? So you might be doing something over and over again, but like what's getting your results, right? Is it the release on the throw? Is it what if you put effort into is going to give you like 80% better results, right? So when we think of like a Pareto distribution, there's this concept in business that are 80% of your results come from 20% of what you do. Just kind of like a general rule, but a lot of times you see it in even more extreme circumstances. So maybe 20% of your employees do 80% of your work, but maybe for books, 99% of your sales come from 1% of your books, right? So 1%, or, and especially in music, you have like an even more extreme version of this where most of your music sale, most of the songs played are the same 1% of the total library of songs. And so can you identify kind of those needle movers and then put effort into them? And then you need to get advice, like get feedback from somebody and then do the thing. I'm actually remaking this video, so I'm attempting to do this now. Can you listen to the advice? It took me 3 days to sit down and make this because it was just, I don't know, I had like some mental block, right? But I knew I needed to sit down and remake the video and make some specific changes. So you need a mentor. You need to be able to listen to your mentor. And then you have to do stuff over and over and over and over again, right? So it's that improvement process. Are you putting in the time to master your craft? And that's a yes or no answer, right? So Malcolm Gladwell came up with a number like 10,000 hours of doing something. So that's if you work 2,000 hours a year, which is about 40 hours a week for 50 weeks, that's 5 years of work, like straight work, to really get to where you want to be with a task. And it's definitely something that you dedicate yourself to and go forward to, especially if you're creating a vision, if you're creating a philosophy like Sagittarius seems to imply. That's going to take time. It's going to take refinement. And then you can kind of move on to Capricorn. And that is what we'll talk about next time.